Namaste and welcome to a very special episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast, where we deep dive on the US presidential elections. We're less than a month away from the polls and things are starting to heat up. There's all of the drama and excitement that such a high stakes event can induce. But there's also some nervous anticipation in terms of what this will mean to the country itself and what it will mean to us here in India. So, joining me to discuss the various nuances are our regular Bharatvaarta guests, Rohit Jayaraman and Abhishek Paul, both of whom have an active interest in US politics. We'll also be using some slides to complement some of what is being said. But to those listening on audio platforms, you don't have to worry. We'll try our best to describe things as explicitly as possible. We just thought it's about that time in our journey where we should add some visual pyrotechnics. So, Abhishek, maybe we can rewind the clock a bit to 2016 and talk about how things panned out then.
Sure, Gary. Hi, Rohit. Good to see you. So, looking at the 2016 results, as you will recall, it was a well-known upset that happened, as most people did not expect Donald Trump to win that election. But before that, it's useful to step back and just talk a little bit about the system that US has for its presidential elections. So the US follows what is known as the electoral college process, where what happens is that the votes are sort of counted and tallied at a state level. And the person or the ticket that wins that particular state takes the entire number of seats allocated to that state. So when, let's say, the Democrats, as they typically do, win California, they take away all the seats allocated to California. And so what has happened in 2016 and has happened a few times in the recent past is that one party, that is the Democrats, had more number of the votes counted if you counted them individually, about 3 million more. But when it came to a state-by-state addition of the electoral college votes, the Republicans actually quite comfortably from around 306 electoral college votes, right? And as you can see on the screen, the common prediction was that Clinton herself would win about 307. And so between the sort of consensus before the election ended and how it panned out, Trump was able to turn around about 75 electoral college votes via four states. So there were Florida in the southeast. It's a big state, 29 seats there. And then, in the Rust Belt via Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, 3 states he picked up with narrow margins of about 70,000 votes in between the 3. And he was able to, get this upset thanks to some excellent tactical, campaigning by his side in the final stages. And if you look at the main reasons of his campaign, he was able to tap into the discontents of globalization faced by, the American working class, which had seen its sort of jobs being shipped away to, Asia and things like that. And so, using a slightly populist platform, which is different to the typical Republican one, he was able to, have this turnaround in the Republican Party's fortunes, which seemed bleak in the Obama years and leading into this particular poll. Ajay, your thoughts?
Right. So, Rohit, sorry, I wanted to ask you, what are some specific attributes about the 2016 election that, fooled the pollsters, right? So one of those things that we keep hearing about is the fact that, Trump voters don't say that they're explicitly Trump voters, right? I mean, there's a lot of signaling to the opposite that happens. What are some of those attributes and how will it play out in 2020?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie and Abhishek. So moving on to basically what happened in 2016, right? From my perspective, I think there are 3 key takeaways that sort of lead into what you can call the 2020 election, and which explains 2016 and why things may or may not be the same in 2020, right? The first one is, as you rightly mentioned, about polling, in the sense that was there a polling failure or not? And the answer to that is actually a lot more complex than most people would like to understand. Because the first thing is the national polls, and as Abhishek very correctly explained, because the US has this system where while there's a national election, the results are actually based on how you do statewide. There's not too much value in a national poll beyond your general predictive value, right? Like they're not necessary, like your national poll can be accurate, and actually most national polls were fairly accurate, or at least within the margin of error. When they said that Clinton was winning the national vote, she did. The problem really came in understanding where the states that again Abhishek mentioned were voting. Because if you look at these maps again, there were 4 states that were clearly different, right? That's Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And Florida, I mean, was very much within the margin of error, right? I mean, it was literally a dead heat on the last day. And so it was not really very surprising that Trump ended up winning Florida. With Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, 2 different things happened, right? One was these states were not polled properly, in the sense that they had all been won by Democrats since 1992. And I think in Wisconsin's case, even in 1988 or something. So there was, and while there were always, some of these elections were close, and there was this thing that Republicans might have a go at it, because Donald Trump was generally pretty unpopular. People didn't really think that he would win these states that no Republican had won for a long time. So polling in these states, especially Michigan and Wisconsin, was a very, very one either sparse and or of low quality. And that's something that a lot of people forget. People just didn't poll these states well, so they got confused with the result. The other big thing with the polling is in the US, again, polling really depends on modeling, right? Because it's a diverse country with a lot of different ethnic groups, people vote differently based on their education levels, etc. You really need to get your electorate right when you model a poll, and that's where the second thing that happened in 2016, that a lot of white working class voters, right, and the best way to describe that is white voters who didn't go to college, they just turned out in large numbers for Donald Trump. And obviously that created a huge this thing in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, because these 3 states are among the highest states in the US with a proportion of whites without a college degree. And that's why this became such a big deal. Now, if you look at Ohio, right, which if you see the map, falls right there in between, in the same belt, and even Minnesota, which is just next to Wisconsin, again, both states with a very high number of whites without a college degree. All of those states really dramatically overperformed for President Donald Trump. And one of that is people couldn't predict it because they turned out in larger numbers than they used to turn. They were doing over the last 20 years. Like there's a very interesting article written immediately after the 2012 election, right, by this guy called Sean Trend, who's RCP's senior electoral analyst, who I think gets American politics really well, though I haven't really followed him over the last couple of years, where he had actually written an article on this. Where did the missing white voters go? And he had compared this from 1992 or I think 98 to 2092, actually, when Ross Perot had run as a populist, to 2016 to 12, and said that there were quite simply a large number of rural whites who had not voted. Where did they go? And the answer was, they just turned out again for President Donald Trump, who, by the way, had a reasonably similar platform to Ross Perot in 1992 of some sort of economic populism and nativism. That really worked for these guys, right? Interestingly, Florida is another place where actually this works, because a lot of whites, including whites without a college degree from these Rust Belt states, go to Florida to retire. So Florida, even though it's not geographically close to these states, has some sort of, at least parts of Florida do have that tendency. And that was shown even in the results, where it was entire, the greater Tampa that actually swung really hard for Donald Trump. So that's the second thing I want to say. The third thing that's linked to it is working class whites just hated Hillary Clinton, right? I mean, like Hillary Clinton, and it's not necessarily policy driven, right? Of course, policy matters, but at a very deep personal level, they had a sort of a visceral dislike for her, which obviously helped Donald Trump because he was the not Hillary candidate, and that's like there was a stat that said of the people who thought both were unsuited to be president, more than 70% voted for Donald Trump or something like that. So basically, it was the second least unpopular candidate beating the the second most unpopular candidate beating the most unpopular candidate, right? Or something like that, at least among working class whites. And that is something that really, I think, will play a big role in 2020 because Donald Trump is not running against Hillary Clinton.
Right. How much do you think that deplorable's comment hurt her?
I think it probably did hurt her to a good degree, right?
Yeah.
So again, as Abhishek said, she lost by such a narrow margin that literally everything that
Right.
happened or didn't happen, you can say, cost her the election, starting with the Comey letter. Then she didn't go to Wisconsin at all. Like she never visited the state during campaigning. So n number of things, and the deplorables thing really hurt her, not because it revealed a secret that people didn't know about it. It just put it out in the open. What exactly were the issues Hillary Clinton had with this particular set of voters, right?
Right.
And to that extent, yeah, of course, it hurt her.
Right. So net, is it fair to say that some of those swing factors will not play such a major role in 2020, Rohit?
Yeah, I would say that, of all the three factors that I mentioned, I think while probably President Trump does retain quite a bit of his support among working class whites, there are many reasons why I don't think it will work so well, so efficiently for him this time as it did the last time.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's just move on from this then and move on to the present times. Rohit, again, it'll be useful for us to set some context here in terms of where we are with the elections at this point of time, right? So here you see President Trump's favorability rating, right? So 42.9 favorable, 54.2 unfavorable, right? What do you have to say?
I think this leads to my basic point on a lot of elections, right? If you win an election by some sort of, narrow margin or a fluke, it gets very difficult for you if you don't try to expand your coalition over the time you're actually governing, right? Since that President Trump, as you can see, started off as a very unpopular leader, and his governing style really didn't focus on endearing him to people who didn't like him already. Now, is that right? Is that wrong? I would say if you already were at, say, 70% popularity, you don't really need to win over the other 30%. But when you're at, already below 50%, it gets very difficult if you don't do much to win over the. And again, I think President Trump made this gamble and of thinking that he really didn't have much of a chance with educated whites, right? Even after he got power. And I think there are two aspects to it. One was probably him thinking that, whatever with the media not being in his favor, etc., things will really not go down well. And it makes sense for him to keep his base and shore it up and just make it a turnout election like in some ways 2016 was. The second one, I think he realized that he simply didn't have as a person, doesn't have the messaging discipline that was needed to sort of get these people to stick with him, right? And he made this gamble of trying to appeal to blacks and even Hispanics. And I don't think, and that's where I think President Trump faced an issue that, the Republican Party brand is still so toxic among especially blacks, that him reaching out to blacks didn't really help. Because of that, I think he didn't reach out to other groups who may have been more open to voting for him, because he clearly hadn't hit his floor with educated whites in 2016, right? And that's what's basically happening
right
2020.
Abhishek, how is the impact of the coronavirus showing in this approval rating for you?
Yeah, so on the coronavirus thing, I think, Trump started off, I think I would say okay, but then I think, in some senses, the Democrats, the blue states, bore the brunt of the virus, especially New York in the earlier months. But overall, I think, things have gone in sort of various wild ways over in the United States the last few months. So the whole thing around, the killing of George Floyd, and then the protests, then there is this mask versus not wearing masks movement. So there are like too many things that are happening, in the United States during this pandemic period, which kind of makes it hard to pinpoint whether he's benefiting a lot or he's having a lot of reduction in his support. I think, overall, his sort of unfavorability has remained well above the 50% mark. And while you can see a slight increase in the last few weeks, that is possibly in terms of his favorability, that possibly could be to do with his chance of getting a new Supreme Court judge into picture, which could probably energize the Republican supporters. But overall, I think, especially if you look at the COVID, I would say it's very hard to sort of lay out an impact, and if at all, it might be slightly negative for Trump.
Right. Again, I mean, there are multiple factors at play, but how much of a factor do you think is his own getting diagnosed with COVID and then making sort of a recovery at this point of time, Abhishek?
Yeah. So on that, again, it's almost like what you're thinking about the person was before that incident is sort of determining how you look at it. So for example, in Republican favoring circles, it's looked at as that he's been very brave in terms of how he's handled his personal disease, and how he's come back quickly and he's going to start campaigning again. If you're on the other side, they talk about it in terms of him being very reckless, in terms of have that event to announce Judge Barrett, and then that sort of became a spreader event, and then he is not being transparent in terms of his medical bulletin and test results, and he's putting White House staff and other people at risk, which shows he's not a very sensitive person. So it kind of, your view on the whole occurring seems to be dependent on your predisposed views already, right? So again, I don't think per se that is an event that will change the elections much.
Right. So last question on this, and it's to both of you. Do you think that the people who will vote have already made up their mind?
Yeah, I would think so. I think I would personally think more than 95% of the voters would have already made up their minds. I think one mistake I think Donald Trump and the Republicans are making is sort of dragging the stimulus thing quite a bit. I think if for example voters would have received another check before the election day, it might have tilted a few more votes towards him, because they would feel that, okay, this is a government which helped us out, right?
Right. Okay. All right. Let's move on from this then to basically some deciding factors in this election, right? And we'll look at some demographics and, typically how the vote splits in that case. So Abhishek, over to you. Walk us through what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. So I think this is a 2020 election survey, but this very closely resembles the analysis that you would have seen for 2016, which Rohit also pointed out while he was explaining the 2016 election results. So there are some clear sort of trends which you can easily pick out based on demographics. So, for example, the Democratic Party is extremely favored by women, right? So it's almost 55 to 39, 56 to 39 favorability among the women. Among men, it is almost a dead heat right now. And Donald Trump had done better on that little bit in 2016, right? If you look at race, obviously the Republican Party is ahead among white voters, while the Democrats are almost very dominant, right, among blacks, Hispanics, Asians, etc. So that is a classic, easy way of identifying who's a Democrat voter or a Republican voter, right? The age group also has a clear trend. So as the younger you are today in America, the more likely that you are going to be a Democrat voter. The older you are, the support for Republicans increases, right? Similarly, education is also a very sort of clear, distinct parameter between the two parties. The more educated you are, the more likely that you would vote for, the Democratic Party. So one of the things that people and pollsters often talk about is, white college grad versus the white non-college grad, right? And the white non-college grad population was the one that sort of swung quite, sharply towards Donald Trump in 2016. I don't think that sort of thing would change much, right? So, things like that, we can go on and on, but largely speaking, these are the clear sort of demographic trends. I think one that is not on our screen, but also worth talking about is in terms of rural versus urban. So if you are someone located in the rural parts of America, then you are more likely to be a Republican voter, while Democrats have a much stronger hold on the urban voter. The suburban voter is, of course, something that is contested heavily, and Donald Trump has been trying to shore up his support among that suburban base. So housing in suburban areas, right, is a big talking point, for example, for Republicans. So they would say that we would like you to have your nice sort of suburban localities maintained via the existing sort of norms, while in a sort of increasing population kind of thing, maybe the other side would say that that place should get more gentrified. Of course, from state to state that depends. Democrats in California would again say that they are not in favor of more gentrification of places that we have seen in, let's say, San Francisco or so on. So, but yeah, suburban voters are probably sort of important demographic as well when you look at this election.
Right. Rohit, look at the, Republicans or people who lean Republican voting for Trump, right? That's at around 85. And then look at the Democrats or people who lean Democrat voting for Biden and Kamala. That's at 93. Do you think the difference will cause, some sort of an impact as such?
Yeah, I think that is the key thing here, right? Literally, in the sense that Trump, and just going back to the previous discussion, right? What's happened with President Trump is that in 2016, while he got a lot of non-college whites to vote for him, he also sort of, and he did lose some amount of college-educated whites, right, especially women, in his because of his particular idiosyncrasies. But he did manage to retain a pretty high floor with them, and that sort of fallen off, right, like. And that is probably the group that you say who are generally, would prefer to vote for a Republican, but who would probably not want to vote for Donald Trump either because one, there are significant differences between his policy stances and the traditional, or at least a subset of Republican policy stances, and the other one is that he has certain characteral issues, right, which a lot of people wouldn't want to vote for a person because of that, and that's where this big difference really comes. And the other thing is that unlike Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden is someone who appeals to working class whites, right? I mean, the man has built a career literally on being a working class representative of working class whites, because I mean, the Democrats were the party of a large section of the working man for most of the 20th century, and Joe Biden literally is a relic of that past, right? I mean, still he's probably at the same level Hillary Clinton was, which shows that if not for Joe Biden, a non-Joe Biden Democrat would have probably done worse. To that extent, Biden is the kind of guy who's able to maximize Democratic support, while Trump is, I mean, the kind of person who's going to minimize Republican support when compared to 2016, and that's probably why they're where they are in the polls, if you ask me.
Right. You want to talk about, how the swing states and the electoral college dynamics will play out?
Yeah, sure. So I think basically, if you look at the states, already discussed 4 states, right? I mean, Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which were the 4 states that people didn't expect Trump to win last time, or at least 3 of them, and which he won. And if you look at the polls now, all of them show a pretty heavy lead for Joe Biden, especially the 3 erstwhile blue wall states, right? And that's probably because, as I said, all US states do have a fairly good amount of college-educated whites, and that's again a section where Trump has sort of lost his support. He had already done really badly in suburbs of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, or even in Philadelphia suburbs. He's doing even worse. There's only so much amount of whites without a college degree that you can keep tapping into, and especially when there's someone like Joe Biden. And Joe Biden himself has deep roots in Pennsylvania. While he was a senator from Delaware, he's very much considered a Rust Belt Democrat, so that really helps him there. Now there's a new set of swing states that have emerged, which are again weaknesses that President Trump had in 2016, right? In the sense that he had weaknesses with suburban voters. Again, that's your educated whites who've traditionally been a Republican constituency. Arizona was closer than it had been for decades in 2016. Arizona probably, I think now in all the polls, is a state where Joe Biden is favored to win. And that's again because Arizona is basically, if you look at it, the large majority of people who actually vote in Arizona, while it's a huge state, probably bigger than most Indian states, the large number of people who vote there are basically live in the Phoenix metropolitan area. So it's actually one large suburb, which doesn't really get reflected on the map, and he's struggling there. Same with Georgia, right? Like Georgia is going the way of certain others. Like Republicans have had issues in the South for a while, starting from 2008, because Virginia became more suburban. Obama won it. He won it again in 2012. North Carolina's been trending that way, where Obama won it once. He lost it the second time, and Trump won it last time. It's the same dynamics, right? As more and more suburban and educated whites go, because North Virginia has become a large portion of Virginia is today the DC suburbs, again, educated whites. Also, a lot of educated non-whites, especially Asians. Same with North Carolina with its research triangle. Now that phenomena has moved into Georgia, which I think Republicans have won continuously since 1976. Because Atlanta is growing, Atlanta suburbs, again, more educated whites, more non-whites, educated non-whites. The same in, of course, even in Texas, which a lot of people have been talking about. So some of these, that's another set of swing states. Last time, Virginia and Colorado. Again, Colorado is like Arizona, right? In the sense that a large amount of the state is just the Denver suburbs. So Colorado and Virginia had already flipped. Georgia and Arizona seem to be following them. So that's two sets of swing states. Even hardcore Trump state of 2016, like Ohio, seems to be in trouble for President Trump. Same with Iowa, again, states in the Rust Belt full of whites, primarily, unlike the other states we just discussed. Still, there are issues because Joe Biden is able to do better among working class whites as opposed to Hillary, while again, suburban well off whites are trending away. So that's broadly, I think, the scene there. There are the same factors are in play across all states, honestly, just depending on where the state fits into the demographic picture. Some states are probably a few years ahead of the curve, behind the curve. So yeah, I think it's the same story, honestly.
Right. So Abhishek, what about some other things like voter suppression or allegations of voter suppression, and other key endorsements that could come in the last leg of the elections?
Yeah, so I think voter suppression is a big talking point always, especially from the Democratic side. The key issue this year is about ballots via mail, right, or mail-in ballots as they call it. Now with the pandemic, so if you look at the 2016 data, I think about 20% people already used to vote via mail in the US. And with the pandemic, one can imagine that the proportion there would be much higher, right? And so as we speak, I think the mail-in ballots have been happening for quite some time already, right? So people have already been sending in their votes. Now there are concerns in terms of, so uh, President Trump has been talking about, how these votes are not reliable, whether they will be counted properly or not, whether there'll be a bias in that. So that part has been kind of raised quite a bit by his side. I think the Democrats do believe that, much more of a proportion of their voters actually choose to, uh, you know, go via this, vote by mail route. One of the weird things which is hard to believe for us as Indians is that the election day is not a holiday, not a public holiday in the US, right? And so it is sort of believed that discourages poorer people to actually take a day off and go for votes. And Democrats kind of believe that, that is a kind of systemic bias against them. And so people who cannot afford to take a day off would choose to, go for this mail route. But if their votes are not counted properly, then that's a problem. So that issue is going to be talked about a lot. I think another weird characteristic there is that their sort of election system seems to be quite, when you compare with our electoral machines and EVMs, what all we have, we kind of do it very efficiently, at least the counting part, right? Whereas there you hear that they'll be counting ballots by hand, obviously, and the electoral mails counting will keep on happening for quite a few days after the most of the votes have been counted. And so there is a fear that if it's very close to call in a few states, key states, then this election could once again go down to the Supreme Court, right? And that's where now with President Trump's opportunity, along with the Republican majority Senate, to put in another judge. So they feel that, there is a fear among Democrats that this 6-3 majority will definitely vote for Trump in the Supreme Court. Now, I think that is not really a very good reason, because ultimately judges, I would think, would go by the facts of the case here, but that is definitely a talking point. Uh, when it comes to late endorsements, I think or endorsements in general, I think obviously Hollywood and media, etc., have been going all out for Joe Biden. They even brought in some Republicans or people related to the Republican Party to, talk about endorsing Trump, whether it is Cindy McCain or, John Kasich. I mean, in terms of endorsements, I think Biden is definitely doing well. But again, I would say that, it's not really a big deciding factor right now.
Yeah. They even had Greta Thunberg come out today and endorse Biden. I don't know how many of them were waiting on edge for Greta's endorsement, but there we have it anyway, right? All right, guys. So let's. I think we spoke about the swing states as well, right, and how they can change the tide. Any additional comments on this, or we could move on?
Yeah, so I think I'll try to very simply make the math very simple, right? So if you look at you have put about 14 states, swing states here, which are about 212 electoral college votes among the 538 that we have. So that's substantial. Now, President Trump won 179 out of 212 in this. So he has a very big incumbency in these swing states. Now, about 4 states out of the 14 here were won by Joe Biden: Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Virginia. So I think as the polling goes, he's quite comfortable in those states, so he'll win them, and that those 33 sort of will go towards him. Now it comes down to how much of the states that were won by President Trump last time that uh, Joe Biden can pick up, right? And among them, the ones that we have talked about the most seem quite possible that he'll pick up right now based on the polling. So there is Michigan, there is Pennsylvania, and there is Wisconsin. Those three, I think he has a very good lead, right? And if he is able to pick up even these three, he's over the line of 270 that is needed. He's also very much in the game, in fact, leading in some of the other ones like, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. The only, I would say, lock-ins for President Trump are Texas, Iowa, and Georgia, right? So those he will still be able to retain. But as of now, with the polling, and unless the polling goes once again really haywire as last time, Joe Biden should be able to win most, or I mean, some of these swing states decisively. That should put him in the presidency. And as Rohit said, I think one big thing that helps him is that he's not Hillary Clinton. He's sort of a guy who's been popular for the white working class. He can roll up his sleeves and talk, although he's not doing much of that right now in the pandemic. But his image of his last 30, 40 years in public space helps him. And so basically, to summarize, I think right now the polls, even at a state level, give a reasonable amount of confidence for the Democrats that they should be able to pull through.
Right. So essentially, they just got any average Joe to, compete against Trump, and he has an upper hand.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So moving on from this, let's look ahead and let's discuss game plan, right? So Rohit, assume that you're in the Biden and Kamala team, right? Or Kamala, as one should say, right? What would you do hereon going forward?
I think it's pretty simple for the Democrats, right? In the sense that they just need to run the clock down, unless the polls are drastically wrong. And I mean, it's difficult to think that polls would be this wrong that there is so many something that's so wrong that everything is going to go haywire. So just run the clock down. I think the other advantage really is that people know President Trump a lot, right? So, and Joe Biden honestly is not Hillary, that he has a lot of dark secrets in his closet. And honestly, I mean, quite a lot of troubling stuff has come out about Joe Biden in terms of corruption, especially by his son. But those don't seem to really matter. So at this point, I don't think there's really nothing much they need to do. They can just wait the days out, and that's about it. Like
Yeah,
there's a drastic polling failure, and polling failure I think mostly will be driven again due to faulty demographic modeling. Unless that happens, then it's not about like Trump actually being more popular among people who say they're voting for Biden or something. It's just about how the pollsters have been modeling the electorate. So that's again something that's really not in Joe Biden's hands. So I think this election is really a reflection of the last 4 years, or I would say at least the last 1 year at the bare minimum. And that way, I don't think there's nothing much that can really be changed either way in the last 1 month or so.
Right. So Abhishek, same question to you. What should the Republicans and the Trump-Pence team have to do going forward?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure in terms of what all they can do now. There seems to be some talk that he will not be attending the next debate if it's held over whatever Zoom or whatever. So, but I think I mean he can still make a last ditch attempt at those same Rust Belt states, right? So his path to victory would again require something extraordinary of picking up very narrow wins in few of these or most of these swing states. And as he seems to be willing to travel and do rallies, I think that's what he can still do, right? He can try his best to get go to those places if possible and do rallies. And also, if possible, he would like Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate to get Judge Barrett confirmed before the elections. Maybe that is something that could energize the Republican voters.
Right. Okay, we're approaching the end of the podcast. One question to the both of you, right? I think the biggest question for all of us here in India is how will any of this affect us? Now, while we've seen, sort of a non-partisan, line of relations between US and India, right? Do you guys have some point of difference in terms of, how this will play out if certain people come to power? I mean, we can start with Rohit and then, Abhishek, you can add to that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion on this, right? In the sense that a lot of people say the strategic partnership will keep growing. The certain other there will be continuous focus on economy, etc., etc. I think if we keep growing, no one can ignore us. I think broadly, really, this question, the answer to this question depends on what you want, right? I mean, it's not like every Indian perceives the Indian national interest in the same way. I mean, even people who can broadly even belong to the same political persuasion. So, if you ask me, I think if there's a Joe Biden presidency, the reactions to certain things like, say, Article 3, scrapping of Article 370, right? To just start with, obviously that doesn't need to happen again. That would have definitely been different. And that's where I think some of these things do matter, because the US actually did give a lot of, under President Trump, did give a lot of cover to India when Pakistan and China went on that whole offensive in the United Nations. Well, obviously France and because again there's a P5, right, with a veto. So some of these things really do matter, and obviously the US is the world's most powerful country, right? And under Joe Biden, US might even be able to sway a lot more countries to what it is saying, like, because especially something like the European Union, right? The EU really doesn't like President Trump, so it didn't really matter what the US said. The EU took its own path, but that's not really going to be the case if there's a Joe Biden presidency. And to that extent, I think depending on what India wants to do, it will matter, right? I mean, if say we want to launch a nationwide NRC, obviously the government has denied that. But if someone wants to do that, then that's I don't think going to be so easy if there's Joe Biden presidency. And it's pretty clear, right? Like with someone like Ben Rhodes, who was pretty high up in the Obama administration's national security apparatus. If you see his tweets, the kind of panels he participates in, etc., there's clearly a particular point of view in the Democratic establishment. And I mean, yeah, your bread and butter issues may not get affected. Like, it's not like somebody's going to put a ban on all Indians going to the US, or like, put India in some axis of evil like Iran and North Korea. But I mean, if that's not what you're really looking for, if you're focused on other issues domestically and being able to do it without foreign interference, then I don't think, I think there will be a difference depending on whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump who's elected.
Right. So, Abhishek, how do you see either of these presidencies playing out on some of the important issues, right? Those could be the H-1B visas, outsourcing, or some of the national security elements that, Rohit brought up, national security and foreign affairs elements that Rohit brought up.
Yeah, so I think right now, I would say that there is no clarity as far as I can see, because the Democratic Party itself is a very big, diverse party. I mean, as both the parties are there, because they just have two major parties. So each of the parties themselves are very big and diverse, and it's not clear for who would be the key people for Biden. And actually, in this presidential model, the people also matter, right? So who, for example, becomes the Secretary of State, etc., would matter, right? Because if you recall our discussion on Jaswant Singh a few days back, right? So he was able to have a very good personal rapport with Strobe Talbot, who was a Democrat, right? So, I mean, the personalities themselves will matter. But yeah, I think so. The one thing I would say, and when I listen to people talk about US foreign policy potentially under a President Biden, is I think India does not really figure in their top 3, 4 talking points, right? So there is always Russia, which the Democrats have hyped up for some reason. But the most interesting thing would be China, right? So we don't. So I would say that one of the things President Trump got right was that he recognized that China is a big threat, right? And something needs to be done about it. So we don't know how the Democrats will, behave in terms of both trade as well as the overall security issue. So if, for example, they do believe that China is a huge threat and the number one threat that they face in the world, then it's possible that India will be considered a key element in countering China. Similarly, I think after that, of course, I think the Israelis will face a lot more heat under a Democrat administration. And in India would be sort of, I mean, as Rohit said, some of these contentious things like CA, etc., are clearly where the Democratic side has a different opinion on this. But so yeah, in India will find it a little challenging to navigate the a potential Biden administration. But of course, we have a great foreign minister today, and one hopes that he and his team are able to have a good relationship with the Democrats too. And this generally we have seen a good trend in the last three presidencies, whether it's George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Donald Trump. And ideally, we would want that continues. Specifically to H-1Bs, I don't see uh, them doing anything drastic suddenly, right? So that should not become a major issue under Joe Biden.
Right. Final question. The fact that, Kamala Harris is an Indian American, does it factor in at all? I mean, any brownie points on that front? Abhishek, you can take this.
Yeah, so no, absolutely not. So I think she will treat, she seems to be a very mainstream Democrat, and she will treat India like any other mainstream Democrat today would. I don't think that would matter, apart from a sort of nice, happy interview with an NDTV or something. But those things will wear off very quickly, and it'll become pretty issue-based.
Right. Okay. So that was a fascinating deep dive, guys. Got to learn many new facets of the US presidential elections. We'll definitely do a repeat in the weeks to come, hopefully one before the elections itself. Thank you so much, Abhishek. Thank you, Rohit, for this a wonderful, insightful podcast. And thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with more episodes. Follow us on @Bharatvaarta on all social media sites. Right. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharatvaarta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.